Good evening and welcome to the Mount Olive Baptist Church. I'm Pastor James Victor. We're so delighted that you've joined us tonight for this important conversation and discussion. We, in partnership with the Mount Olive Baptist Church CDC, the Olive Branches of Hope, are excited that you've joined us as we are exploring the requirements, the possibilities of voting in this upcoming election cycle. We believe here at Mount Olive in being spiritually grounded, and as a part of our discipleship is being civically engaged. And so we are glad to have our distinguished panelists here tonight, who will be facilitated by Reverend Dr. Asa J. Lee, our former associate pastor and member of this congregation. So I'll turn it over to him now so he can lead us in this vitally important discussion as we prepare for this upcoming election cycle. God bless.
Good evening. We're excited to have a wonderful panel of folks to be with us to talk about the 2020 election, which is now under 2 months away. And you've heard this said in news and in other places, and that is this is the most important election in American history. Well, the truth of the matter is every election is important. Every single opportunity to exercise our rights are important. And I will say, though, the uniqueness of this election is that we haven't since the early 20th century had a global pandemic in which we've had to participate in an election. And so we are all nervous, we're all anxious, but we are also striving to give the most education possible. Voter education is absolutely critical, as well as voter participation, as well as getting rid of rumors and being able to dispel rumors with actual facts. So I'm excited to have all the three jurisdictions in the Washington, D.C. area, the DMV, as we will come to know it. And we're going to have each panelist introduce themselves. Let me introduce myself again. I'm the Reverend Dr. Asa Lee. I am an associate minister here at Mount Olive Baptist Church. I also serve in the administration at Wesley Theological Seminary as one of the deans. And so I'm excited to be a part of this conversation where we can learn together and grow together. Let me begin by introducing just generally, and then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves a bit more specifically. First, we have Dr. Alfonso Seville, who is a poll worker trainer for the DC Board of Elections. Your job is to train poll workers. We'll hear from you a little more in just a second. Second, from the state of Maryland, we have the Deputy Administrator for the Maryland State Board of Elections, who's joining us by Zoom, Nikki Charlson. So we're glad to have you with us today by Zoom. And we have the Assistant Registrar for the Arlington County Department of Elections. Is that right? Department of Elections, Kitty Clark Stevenson. And Dr. Seville and Kitty Clark Stevenson are in the sanctuary with me, and Nikki Charlson's in our on Zoom. So I'm going to ask, we're going to go in the DMV order, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Tell us first, really briefly, what you do in your capacity in the election offices.
Sure. Thank you for having me here tonight, Reverend Dr. Lee. Mine is very brief. I quite simply train election workers. So the election workers who process voters on election day, it's my job to teach them how to successfully process those voters.
Great, great. Nikki.
Good evening. Thanks so much for having me. So as I was introduced, I'm the Deputy Administrator at the Maryland State Board of Elections. And so my job is to help with the administrator oversee an office of about 45 people. And right now, our job is to make sure everything is in place and support our local boards of elections. We have 24 offices out throughout the county, throughout the state, one in every county, who are the face of the election. So the part of the election that we as voters see, that's the responsibility of the local boards of elections. And we are the team behind them, helping them get ready and supporting them for all the hard work that they have done and will continue to do.
Thank you. Kitty.
Election Central for over a year now. So when all those calls and concerns come in from the election officials and the precinct chiefs, try to get them resolved and support our electoral board.
Thank you, Kitty. So we're going to jump right in with the content of tonight's session. So I want to begin with the first question, and that is for DC. And that is, one, how do you register to vote? And what are the general criteria for being a voter? And what are any deadlines associated with that? We know a big deadline, which is in November, but what are some other deadlines that, if you live in DC, what are those requirements?
Sure. So voter eligibility in the District of Columbia requires the following. You must be a U.S. citizen, you must be a DC resident, and you must establish residency 30 days prior to the general election, which will be October 4th. You must not claim voting rights in any other voting district. You must be at least 18 years of age, and you must have also been declared, must not have been declared legally incompetent to vote by a court. Registration can be accomplished in a couple of places. So you can register by mail. Registration has to be completed 21 days before the election, so that would be October 13th. The Washington, D.C. Board of Elections District Office is at 1015 Half Street Southeast. You'll see that in the presentation, but it's at 1015 Half Street Southeast, so you can register by mail in person. And you can register with a current government or valid DC DMV issued identification card, any utility bill, bank statement, government check, or paycheck, as long as it's been issued within 90 days prior to the election, and that would be August the 5th. And then also you can register by online at dcboe.org. Please keep in mind that if you do register online, that in order to be able to vote a live ballot on Election Day, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is, you would also need to bring one of those forms of proof of residence that I just mentioned. And we'll also be able to display that on the screen during the PowerPoint.
Okay. So a couple of quick deadlines. One has already passed. August 5th was the timeline for...
No, well, so if you're using a form of proof
Gotcha.
for residency, so that would be a utility bank statement, government check, any kind of paycheck or government issued document. It has to have been issued within the last 90 days
Gotcha.
prior to the election, August 5th or later, in order for it to be a valid document to establish residency.
Understood. So the October dates...
Yep. October 26th is the deadline to register in person at the Board of Elections. And then also, if you're going to register by mail, October 13th is that deadline.
Okay. Register by mail, October 13th. Register in person, October 26th.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
Last thing is that if you fail to meet either of those deadlines, I just want people to be aware that you can still register same day. So you can register the day of election. That includes the early voting period, which I'll talk about when we get to that point as well. But you can register same day and also vote in the District of Columbia.
Okay. You can register the same day and vote in the District of Columbia. We'll get more detail about what that means in just a minute. All right. Nikki, let me repeat the question for you. How do you register to vote? What are the general criteria? And what are any deadlines associated with voting?
Unfortunately, most of what my colleague from DC said also applies to Maryland. So you can register to vote by mail. You can also register to vote online. To use the online system, you do need to have a driver's license, a Maryland issued driver's license or ID card. That's required under state law. But there's paper, there's also government agencies, which admittedly is a little more challenging now that many of them are closed, but online and by paper, and you can either mail that back in or you can drop that off at the local election office. The eligibility is very similar to DC, U.S. citizen, you have to be a resident of Maryland. You have to be you can register as long as you're 16, but you have to be 18 by November 3rd to vote. There are some prohibitions if you've been convicted of buying or selling votes, or you're under guardianship for mental disability, or you're incarcerated for a felony conviction, you're not eligible. And our deadline is to register to vote is October 13th. So just like DC, except we don't have a dual deadline for in-person and online. It is October 13th. But we also, like DC, have same-day registration during the early voting period and on election day. So we do encourage voters to register by the deadline. And the reason for that is it lets us do some of that processing beforehand, and it'll make your voting experience be quicker. Mm-hmm. But we can also facilitate that during early voting or on election day. It just will take a little bit longer because you're doing two processes instead of just one.
So October 13th is deadline for registration in Maryland, but you can also register to vote in person on the day of.
Correct, during early voting or election day.
Okay. Well, and we're going to get to early voting for all three jurisdictions in just a little bit. Thank you, Nikki. Virginia.
Well, where we are different from DC and Maryland, we cannot register you on the day of the election to permit you to vote. If you're going to do that, you need to be that registered voter. And the books for the upcoming November 3rd, 2020 election also is October the 13th. So you're going to want to make sure that you get to do that. How do you do it? Like the other jurisdictions, you can do it in person, you can do it online. We have a website where you can go to get more information. The state elections department actually has a citizen portal that you can go to. You will, however, need a DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles number. either your license number or that photo ID number that you have. That needs to be entered to use the state online system. If you don't have that, then give us a call. Our telephone number is 703-228-3456, and we can mail you a paper application in order to register to vote. You can also go online, and again, that information, I'll give that as we talk a little bit more. And you can also walk in. We have a great assist for those of us in Arlington County that all of our libraries near their door, and I think it's the central door for all of them, are applications as well. So just drive up to a library, grab an application, get it completed, get it to us. Again, you can mail it. 2100 Clarendon Boulevard, Suite 320, Arlington, Virginia, 22201, or walk in and drop it off. We're there on the 3rd floor, and our office, quite frankly, is the only one that's been open during this entire pandemic. So it's been a nice, quiet building for us in some ways, but that's how you get to do that. The eligibility requirements, you do have to be a U.S. citizen and a resident of Virginia. You have to be 18 years or older, or who will be 18 by the next general election. Not been convicted of a felony or judged to be by a court, as mentally incapacitated or are eligible to register to vote and to have your rights restored. And you can apply online and also by email in order to do that.
So another key distinction for Virginia that is different than DC and Maryland is this notion of voter rights restoration, which is not automatic, and you have to still apply for that in Virginia.
Yes.
Okay. And that's available on the county, on the website?
That information is there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question, and I should have said earlier to those in the who are joining us that we want you to, either on Facebook or in some other platform, if you want to type in questions, we'll try to field those as best we can. If we've missed something here that you want information on, we'll try to make sure that comes to us, and we'll talk about that with our panelists. But next question that I only have really 3 questions, and then we'll open this up for folks to engage on this. So what are the ways available to vote in DC, Maryland, and Virginia? So we'll start with DC.
Sure. So in DC, every registered voter automatically will be mailed a mail-in ballot. So obviously there is the option to vote by mail, and we are encouraging DC residents, registered voters, to utilize the mailing voting process if that's available to you. Also, voters who have previously, prior to COVID-19, requested absentee ballots, they will also receive those absentee ballots. So there are 2 ways that voters can vote by mail. The traditional absentee request system, where a voter specifically has to request an absentee ballot to be able to participate in the election. And then because of the COVID regulations this year specifically, every registered voter in the District of Columbia will automatically be mailed a mail-in ballot to the address that is registered with their voter registration. So in addition to the mail-in ballots and mail-in voting process, early voting will be available a full week before the start of the election. So early voting in the district begins Tuesday, 10/27, and it goes to the following Monday, November 2nd, 1 day before the general election. Early voting hours are from 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. And you can visit earlyvoting.dcboe.org for a list of early voting centers, also for a list of directions to the various early voting centers. And during the period of actual early voting, they'll also have waiting times that will be updated periodically so that voters are aware. Throughout the district, in each of the 8 wards, there will be at least 2 voting centers open and available for early voting. So for that week prior to November 3rd election, in every ward, there will be at least 2 voting centers that are available. And then actually on election day, the Board of Election is currently looking to add over 80 voting centers for the November 3rd election. That list of voting centers is being updated, and so information pertaining to election day specific voting is available at dcboe.org/where-to-vote/election day vote centers. On election day, voting hours are from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. In order to be eligible to vote a live ballot, voters must be in line by 8 p.m. So if you're in line by 8 p.m., even if you haven't voted, right, the polls close, or the voting center rather closes at 8 p.m., but as long as you're in line by 8 p.m., every voter who's in line by 8 p.m. will be eligible to vote in the general election on the 3rd.
So all this information is available again for DC, dcboe.org.
Correct.
And a couple of quick things I want to point out again. The date for early voting begins when?
Early voting begins the Tuesday prior to Election Day, so that's October 27th through Monday, November the 2nd, okay. 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay.
And we are open on Sunday as well.
Okay, so polls are open for early voting on Sunday, the Sunday after October the 27th.
Correct.
And they close on Monday at 8 p.m., 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
7
early
p.m.
voting.
on Monday, the November the 2nd.
Correct.
And then we'll reopen at 7 a.m. on November the 3rd for Election Day. Thank you from D.C. Thank you, Dr. Seville. Okay, Nikki, same question. What are the ways available to vote in Maryland?
Thank you. So we have 2 general ways that voters can vote. They can vote by mail, which is what we are encouraging in light of the pandemic. But for this election, if a voter wants to vote by mail, the voter must submit a request. We are not automatically mailing ballots to voters in Maryland. So it's really important that voters who want to vote by mail submit that request. That deadline is October 20th, and it means it's a receipt deadline, which means that the local board of elections must receive the request by October 20th. So suggesting voters mail at least 5 days before. The sooner the better. The sooner we get it, the sooner we can process it and mail a ballot. There are also other ways to vote, which would be in person. And so we have early voting from October 26th through November 2nd. So that's 8 days, the Monday to the following Monday. And then, of course, Election Day on November 3rd. So we'll have early voting centers open in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. There'll be 12 early voting centers. And then on Election Day, Prince George's will have 39 voting centers and Montgomery will have 40. And then the other counties around the area will have some, but Montgomery and Prince George's typically have the most. So early voting and Election Day, the voting locations will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So every day from October 26th through November 3rd, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And again, like DC, if you're in line at 8, you get to vote. Our lists of locations are being finalized now, but they will be posted on our website, which is elections with an S at the end, .maryland.gov. And I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say, and I have forgotten it. Important thing is if you want to vote by mail, you got to ask for it. That deadline is October 20th, and we need to receive it by then. If you want to vote in person, there are plenty of opportunities. Again, October 26th through November 3rd. We are open Saturday and Sunday as well. And just make a plan. If you want to vote in person, plan to vote early so that if something happens and you can't do it, you have other options and you can come back. We are really working hard to make in-person voting be as safe as possible, including all sorts of personal safety equipment for our poll workers and for our voters. But really the best thing is to plan to vote early if you're going to vote in person and give yourself options so that if you get there and there's a long line, that you can come back another day and you're not forced to wait in line like you do if you arrive on Election Day.
Yeah. Thank you. I didn't ask this of DC, but I'm going to ask you and circle back around, and that is drop boxes. Will you have drop boxes for ballots?
Yes, great question. So yes, we rolled out drop boxes in the primary election, and we've expanded the number that we're going to have for the general election. So there will be many drop boxes throughout each county. Again, we're finalizing those locations, and they'll all be posted on our website. But more importantly, they'll come with the ballot. So if you request to vote by mail, included in your packet will be a list of the ballot drop-off boxes in your county. So you'll have that information when you need it. But yes, we are expanding the number and be able to deploy them to more locations. So it's closer to voters than what we had in the primary.
Good. Thank you. DC, I want to circle back and get you an opportunity to answer that.
Yes. So all of our voting centers will have drop boxes, in addition to several drop boxes that will be scattered throughout the city. Again, on the dcboe.org website, it gives a list of the exact locations of those. The other thing I forgot to mention is that at the overwhelming majority of the vote centers, both during early voting and also on election day, will also have curbside voting for senior citizen voters and also voters with disabilities.
Okay.
Let me emphasize that the curbside voting process is not an express voting process. I would say that you should expect to spend at least as much time, if not more, in a curbside voting line as you would standing in a line physically. The curbside voting process is designed to accommodate, again, voters who are 65 and older and voters with disabilities, but voters will also have the option of being able to drop off mail-in ballots and absentee ballots at drop box centers by using the curbside voting process, both during early voting and also on election day.
Okay, thank you. Kitty, I'll repeat the question.
Okay.
What are the ways available to vote in Virginia?
Well, thankfully, last week, our Virginia General Assembly and our governor signed the bill that will allow us to do things that we're mighty glad to see, and really glad that voters will have a lot of options. The drop boxes, we got them. That was one of the things that was approved in the bill that was signed last week. We will have them around several locations, and I'm going to give you that information in just a moment. But they will also be at all 54 of our precincts on election day, as well as you just being able to go and just have voted it and just drop it off and keep moving. We are also looking at additional locations beyond the 54 precincts on election day, that if you need to drop it off before November 3rd, that will happen, and that too will be on our website as that information goes forward. But let me share with you what we've got on the website as of today. Actually, it's been there about 2 days.
Okay.
But early voting for us here in Arlington, we have a new location for the Courthouse Plaza area. Previously, that has always been in our main building, 2100 Clarendon Boulevard, Suite 320, or that first floor lobby area. During the last 3 presidentials, we've just needed more space. But now we're actually going to be at 2200 Clarendon Boulevard at the former Wells Fargo space, right next door to Starbucks. So you're there in the Courthouse Metro, Orange Line, Metro Plaza, your Starbucks, you'll be able to get in, get it done, and get out. And we will have an additional 4 locations also for early voting. But let me give you a little bit of the schedule. Our time to start will be September the 18th through October the 31st. That will be Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., with extra hours on Saturday, October 17th, October 24th, and October 31st from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, October 19th through October 30th from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's an awful lot of detail, which is why it's on that website. So I strongly agree and support Nikki's suggestion. Make that plan, because things happen, and you want to make sure you get that vote taken care of. The other thing about us in Arlington, we will have questions on there with regard to different ones related to the county board, budget items, things of that sort, and also generally constitutional amendments from the state. It takes more time.
Right.
And so even though you may know what you want with regard of the major offices that you're voting for, you do want to get online, take a look at that ballot, take a look at those questions. It's going to be a double-sided ballot this year because that's generally what takes the most time. Like the other jurisdictions, we too are strongly encouraging to vote by mail. We are strongly encouraging do it quickly, do it fast, do it early, because it's going to make the difference. We are not automatically just sending ballots to every registered voter in the Commonwealth. You still have to request it. There's a separate application to vote by mail. The other good thing, however, is that you no longer need an excuse. The General Assembly passed that law. It went into effect July 1 this year. For this election, and henceforth, you no longer need an excuse to vote early. The pandemic, I think, was a factor in helping us to get to that as a state, as a jurisdiction, but we're mighty glad that it's there. Those of you that have already requested that November 2020 absentee ballot, that's already in the system, already being processed. We also had an interesting situation this election cycle with a third-party entity who sent across the Commonwealth.
Yes.
My
Please speak to
goodness.
that. Yes.
That sent across the Commonwealth, your voting registration information is public information. And so they purchased that information and they sent every voter from their list that absentee early voting application. It was pre-populated with your name, your address. The instructions, pretty simple, verify your name, verify the address where you want your ballot mailed. And then they had prepaid envelope to mail it to your local jurisdiction general registrar. They created one problem here in the Northern Virginia area in that Fairfax County and Fairfax City are separate electoral jurisdictions.
Right.
They mixed up the locations. Fairfax County is the largest electorate in the entire Commonwealth. Fairfax City is much, 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 much less.
Right.
So they had just a lot of information that they had to make sure it got over to Fairfax County. Fairfax County had the lesser burden, but nonetheless
Right.
had to get it to the right jurisdiction.
Right.
Fortunately for Arlington, they gave the right address.
Right.
So we informed very early on that if you receive that, if the address and information is correct, if your name is correct, then feel free to go ahead and complete and submit that application. We still had a lot of duality going on because a lot of people were saying, why are you doing this? Who's doing this? We had to make it very clear. It's not the Director of Elections. It's a third party ensuring that those who are eligible to vote have as much opportunity to do that as they can.
Yeah.
So it's our burden to make sure that we reconcile the number of requests to receive an absentee ballot so that it gets processed and you only get one ballot for that one vote.
Right.
So you're not going to get more than one. But let me give you these locations in Arlington where there will be the early voting sites. Aurora Hills Community Center. Their hours are from October 17th to October 31st, Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday, October 17th, 24th, and 31st, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So trying to get those commuters
Right.
that may need that additional time in the evening. The second location is Langston Brown Community Center. October 17th through October 31st, Monday through Friday, 2 to 7 p.m., Saturday, October 17th, October 24th, October 31st, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
If I give you, what's the website? Because I don't want you to read all of that just because they can get it for themselves.
And it'll be there.
Okay.
And the website is vote.arlingtonva.us/early-voting/.
Okay.
One more time, vote.arlingtonva.us/early-voting/. .us/early-voting/
Okay.
That information will be there. Quick statement, though.
Yes.
Madison Community Center and Walter Reed Community Center. So
Okay.
north, south, east, west.
All right. So all 4 Compass Rose areas in Arlington County are covered. I'm going to, before we go to our last question, we've gotten some chatter on Facebook and that. So I want to take a moment to address some quick hit questions. And these are some of these are jurisdiction specific. So I'll let you know and you just pick them up as they come along.
Okay.
In Virginia, what is the residency requirement for Virginia? This person's mother will be relocating from New York.
Oh,
I'll let you deal with that. I'm going to go to another area real quick. Both of these are from Virginia.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay. Virginia.
Okay.
What is the residency requirement for Virginia? This person's mother will be relocating from New York.
I didn't double check that, but I too think it's 30 days.
Okay.
Within 30 days. It's been so long since I've had to look at it. I just honestly don't remember.
So, but they can get that information on the website.
You can get that information on the website.
All right.
Yes.
Just for kicks and giggles, Nikki, what's the residency requirement for Maryland?
It's where you live at the voter registration deadline. So it's 21 days before Election Day.
Okay, 21 days for Election Day. And say DC again, just so we can hear it.
Yep, 30-day residency requirement.
Okay, good. There's a general question about voter registration cards. Do you have to have your voter registration card with you that comes from your jurisdiction? DC?
The answer is no, and that's a great question. You don't have to provide any photo identification in order to vote, and actually it's also against DC law and for registration clerks. When you check in to vote on Election Day, registration clerks by law cannot require you to show ID. If you have a registration card and or your driver's license, it does speed the process up, because in DC, when you check in, the machines, the iPad machines, can scan the barcode on the front of your voter registration card or on the back of your driver's license, and it pulls up, if you're a registered voter, it pulls up your information automatically. There are no issues in terms of the lookup. So I would encourage voters, if they have those items available, to certainly bring them, as they could certainly expedite the process, but they are not required. So
this just is now curiosity. So then how, I show up with nothing.
Right.
How do you verify that I am who I say I am?
As long as your name and the address that you give verbally matches what the registration clerk looks up. If your name and address matches, then you are eligible to vote. If they do not, you can still be eligible to vote, but you'll just vote by a special or provisional ballot. Okay.
And what if Joe Blow behind me comes with the same address and information?
So it will show up that if two voters come in, same exact name, same exact voter information, the person who comes in behind you, it will show up that they have voted already. They will be allowed to cast a ballot. They will have to cast that ballot provisionally, and then within 48 hours after the election, the Board of Election will determine which of those ballots cast is valid and take appropriate action for violators, transgressors.
So I hear that there is a deference to the voter.
Absolutely.
In D.C. on that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I try to avoid too much commentary, but I hear that. I wanted to acknowledge that. So Nikki, do you need a registration card?
No, you do not. That is a card that is useful to a voter. It includes where their polling place is, but for this election, of course, the neighborhood polling places are not going to be open. We're moving to a vote center model, but no, you don't need to. Much like DC, when you check in to vote, you say your name, your address, and your date of birth. That provides the authentication for the poll worker to check you in. So no ID is required to vote either, except for a very small number of voters who didn't validate their identity during the registration process, but it's a very, very small number. So for the most part, you don't have to show ID. to vote. Again, a deference to the voter. If as long as you are providing a name and a date of birth and an address, then that is assumed to be correct. And if someone else comes along in your scenario, we would handle that the same way.
Okay.
Issue that second voter a provisional ballot, which would then be checked later.
Okay, thank you. And Kitty, in Virginia?
Similarly, you're not required to bring your voter registration card. We too send it to you so that you will know your polling location, your voter ID number that's in the state system, thing of that sort. And the law changed again for us. You no longer now are required to have a photo ID in order to vote in Virginia. And that just went into effect this year as well. The other kinds of things that I think people continue to ask is, how do I, quote unquote, let them know that it is I who are voting? Very similarly, your name and address. We have the poll books, it's there. If you did have something with the barcode, the system that reads it, and clearly DMV, it reads, the Department of Motor Vehicles, it reads. That just helps to expedite the process. Our system now, it gives, in early voting, it gives you a little ticket, and you check and confirm it. If that's confirmed, you just go, you get your ballot, you vote it, scan it, and you're out of there. So,
great.
Very similar.
Kitty, another question for you, and then we're going to get to that last question. This person's son is turning 18 this month. He does not have a Virginia ID. Is his passport sufficient to register?
You don't need that to register.
Okay.
So just go register, fill out the form. I'm in the process of vetting you, whether or not the residency requirement is met or those other kinds of things. Our registration folks will follow up with the necessary need to get what you have to have in the way of information or proof.
Great. All right, last question that I have, and then we'll continue to field some questions from the internet. And that is, what kinds of things has your jurisdiction done in light of the pandemic? We've heard you kind of said some of those things. We've heard a lot of rumors about what can happen and what can't happen, what someone wants to happen, that someone we're not going to call out loud, but they are an elected official in the highest office in the land, ... So we want to kind of dispel rumors about, but specifically, how have you expanded? And Nikki, I'm going to flag this for you now. I know that I recall reading that the Maryland State Legislature changed the language from absentee to mail-in ballot. So when it comes to you, can you just make sure that we clear up that confusion that some folks have about that? But what kinds of expansions have you done in this?
Sure. First, I just want to double back, similar to what Nikki said in response to the previous question. DC, there's also that caveat that there's the small number of voters who either register online or by mail who would be ID required voters either during early voting period on election day. Again, that would apply to a very small number of voters, and it says ID, right? But I'm saying, I'm using the words ID. Proof of residency, right? Which includes a number of documents as long as, again, the name and the address of the voter are represented. So I just wanted to say that. And that actually is one of the ways in which, the voting process has been expanded to accommodate the voter. Some of the other ways include, as I've talked about, the mail-in voting process. So again, DC is automatically mailing out ballots to all registered voters in the district. There are the voting center model. So part of what the voting center model means for the District of Columbia is that voters do not have to vote at their assigned precincts, either during early voting or on election day. Any voter can vote anywhere that there is an eligible or open voting center. So no voter will have to vote a special ballot or provisional ballot because they are voting out of precinct. That is a requirement that's being wiped away completely because of the COVID regulations. Also, with the driver's license requirements, so under normal circumstances, a driver's license, if it's presented as a form of proof of residence or to verify a voter's eligibility, identity eligibility, would have to be a currently instated driver's license. Because of the COVID regulations, if your driver's license is expired after March 1st. So DC government is recognizing March 1st as the official beginning of the government's pandemic. So if your license is expired after March 1st and you have not been able to renew it, they will accept licenses that have been expired after March 1st. This is a one-time COVID exception. Like other voting centers in the area, we'll be observing social distancing both outside and inside of the voting centers. So as voters are coming to line up, as the lines begin to extend inevitably outside of the voting centers, in order to stand in line, voters have to have they have to have their face covered. Every voter has to sanitize his or her hands when they enter the voting center. There will be personal safety equipment that's made available for the election workers, and for voters who do not have face mask coverings, they will be provided by each of the voting centers in the district.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Seville.
Yep.
Nikki, what kinds of things have you implemented in Maryland to mitigate and deal with the pandemic?
So first, I'll answer the question that you asked me to address is what's the difference between absentee voting or absentee ballots and mail-in voting and mail-in ballots. And in Maryland, there's absolutely no difference.
Okay.
Our legislature in this session just said we like the phrase mail-in voting or mail-in ballots better than absentee. It's more reflective of what is actually happening. And so that's what we're doing. So in Maryland, there's no difference. The same security and mature procedures that we have around absentee voting are around mail-in voting because it's the same. The only difference, of course, is just the scale. The number of voters that are choosing to participate that way is exponentially more than we've ever seen before. But there is no difference between absentee and mail-in voting in Maryland.
So let me zoom in so I can say this quite clearly. In the state of Maryland, there is no difference between mail-in and absentee. It's the same thing. Amen. If you hear something different from somebody else who has a bully pulpit, in the state of Maryland, there is no difference between mail-in and absentee. Okay, I just wanted to stress that. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It's a common question we get, and it's actually quite an easy answer, is there's no difference.
Right.
So similar to DC, we've done a lot of the same things, right? We are encouraging voters to vote by mail. It's the safest way to vote in a pandemic. We have these robust and secure procedures that support that process, and they are still in place and will be in place. We've moved also to the vote center model. So you can vote in any vote center in your county, and your ballot will be there. So for election day and early voting, it's a vote center model. Ballot drop-off boxes, it's something we've never had before, and voters really seem to like them. We had 13% of our voters statewide use them in the primary, and we expect that number to go up. And it's sort of the benefit to two concerns. One is obviously the pandemic. You can drop your ballot off, not touch anybody, not see anybody, but also with the recent concerns about the delivery mechanisms of the United States Postal Service, it's a way for you to drop your voted ballot into the custody of the local election officials. Those boxes that you're going to see around are controlled and emptied by local election officials. And so if you're worried about the delivery time or allowing, relying on the postal system to deliver it, you can use the ballot drop-off boxes to avoid that. And we are also ordering and deploying lots of personal protective equipment and implementing social distancing and public health guidelines at all of the voting facilities. And lastly, because of the number of people wanting to vote by mail, we are allowing the local boards of elections to start counting ballots before Election Day. That is not something we typically do. But when you're looking at already now, we have 500,000 people have requested a mail-in ballot, and we expect that number to grow, that we need to provide the local election officials with more time to count those ballots. And so that will happen before Election Day. But the results will be embargoed. So just because they're counting, those results will be withheld until after election or Election Day night. But counting ballots earlier is one way to allow us to have results more quickly based on the number of mail-in ballots that we expect to see.
Thank you. Kitty, what kind of things have we done? You've mentioned some of them.
We also had what we kind of referred to as testing opportunities. With one of our primaries that was delayed by the governor, we did on June 23rd, and we had a special election for our county board vacancy on July 7th. And so we literally have had 2 opportunities to not only use the protective equipment, but to develop training and get feedback from our election officials on what was or was not working. So the state did an awful lot of provision with single-use ink pens, for example, to mark the ballots. We have used paper ballots to mark the ballots so they could take it or toss it. We won't be using it again. The same thing with security, folders for your ballot and how you would have voted. With the 6-foot distancing requirement, it's not the same thing when people have a tendency maybe to stand closer in a line as they move forward. But again, we're managing with the safe distancing. But that folder, if they choose to use one, will also be a single use. They can keep it, they can toss it, whatever sort of works with regard to that. Our election officials are required to clean all surfaces as voters are moving through the different aspects of it, and we've sort of combined from the sort of check-in at the poll book to go to a ballot officer. We've actually eliminated that position so that when you check in, that ballot in the privacy shield, if you want it, it's handed to you right away, and then you're directed to a voting marking station. And so again, to try to get people through, be able to manage the distancing. We're bringing on additional workers to help to manage the distancing and the requirement, both outside of the actual polling location and as they enter the polling location and work through our stations in order to get their ballots and vote. Gloves, masks, the plastic shields, just about everything that is out there in order to provide protective equipment for individuals, we have the capacity to do that.
Great. Okay, those are the questions I had. I'm going to encourage you where you are to continue to send in questions. We're going to get to them. They may not be in the order we received them, but I'm going to do as best I can to go through these. This is a Virginia question. I received a Virginia ballot, but have decided to go to a polling location instead. Will this be a problem when I go to a polling place, even though I received the ballot and did not mail the ballot in? I'm going to start with Virginia, but I'm going to ask everyone to respond to that. Yeah.
No, you don't. You can take that ballot to your precinct. You still have to go to your precinct on election day. Or you can bring it into the CAP, our central location, or one of those satellites that you'll go to on the website and handle that right there at that location.
Okay.
So that early voting piece, or on election day, you can bring that ballot that you got into the mail.
Okay, to be clear, you don't have to mail it in just because you requested a mail in. So you can get it in the mail, but you can physically take it to the location
and even drop it in the box.
And even drop it in the box. Is that true in Maryland?
Right. So if you get the mail-in ballot, if you get your ballot through the mail, you can drop it off in person at the ballot drop-off boxes, at a voting location, or at the local election office. You do not have to return it by mail, but you can, and we've included an envelope with prepaid postage if you would like to use the post office to return it.
Okay. And in D.C.?
In D.C., similar circumstances. Just because you receive a ballot by mail, you don't have to return it by mail. You can return it via ballot box. You can return it to the Board of Elections headquarters. You could also bring it to any voting center during early voting or election day. However, one caveat, so because DC voters, DC residents are all receiving mail-in ballots automatically, if you've requested an absentee ballot and you show up to vote on election day, you will be flagged as an absentee requested voter. You can still vote on election day, but you'll have to vote a provisional ballot because you've requested a provisional ballot. If you've just received one, as every DC voter will, and you decide that you want to vote in person, then you will be fine. There's nothing for you to do. But again, you have the option of completing the ballot, bringing it back in, and turning it in. You don't have to submit it via the mail just because you received it in the mail.
That's a good distinction, so that In D.C., again, everyone is being mailed a ballot. Every registered voter is being mailed an absentee ballot. So you do not need to request one.
Right.
And if you do request one, then you're being set apart. You're being flagged for that.
Right.
Okay.
You'll be marked as an absentee requested voter when you check in.
Okay. We have a question for Virginia. I requested absentee ballots for my brother, mom, and I, and haven't received any information. Is there a way I can check the status of our ballots?
Yes, there is. You can go to the citizen portal. That's election.virginia.gov, and put in your DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles number. You have to have that to access that portal online, or call your local jurisdiction office, and they'll be able to get into your voting record and be able to provide information on any absentee ballot history activity around this election for the voter.
And I would assume this is another question. This person did not vote in the last 2 elections. Can they do that same process to check and see if they're still in the rolls?
As long as they are a registered voter and they have requested an absentee ballot, that history is being processed. But I do want to underscore a point that Nikki also made. The number of requests for absentee ballot in this election has created a lot of workload. And so where we might get maybe 80 a day, we're getting like 1,000 a day. And so the literal processing of that, it takes some time.
Right.
We're still trying to get them all done within 48 hours, but no system is perfect. But do call, because if they at least have your name, your address, and a contact number for you, once they do the research, they'll be able to get back to you and tell you exactly where you are in that process.
Okay. I'm dancing around here a little bit. There's a question about requesting a ballot in Falls Church. You need to contact the Falls Church city, your local jurisdiction, wherever you're registered.
Your general registrar for
wherever
that
you're
general
registered.
jurisdiction.
You start there, okay? Are all of the voting times, deadlines, and voter protections mentioned for Arlington consistent with other Virginia counties and the city of Alexandria?
We are different.
Okay.
And that's why you have to go.
Go ahead.
That's why you have to go to your local general registrar. We have several locations, different hours. I don't know what Alexandria is doing. I don't know what Fairfax is doing. So you will go to that local general registrar to get that detailed information.
So let me stress that for Virginia, each jurisdiction, each county and city, municipality has its own process
board.
and own board, own office. And so you need to make sure that wherever you live, you need to contact that particular jurisdiction.
Correct.
That is another subtle distinction between Virginia's a bigger state, but also we've got a lot of other municipalities. Whereas in Maryland, the state board of elections kind of governs that, and each county board of elections kind of oversees that. So, for example, and Nikki, you please correct me if I'm wrong, a city like Bowie does not have a separate process than, say, it falls under the PG County Board of Elections. Is that a fair, an accurate thing to say, or no? Or did I pick the right city that has its own process?
So, I mean, to contrast to Virginia with what Kitty was talking about, Maryland is the same across. So the voting hours are the same. The number of locations varies because that's really driven by population. But for the most part, the policies and procedures across the state are the same. Now, municipal elections are different. So a municipal election where you're electing a mayor of Bowie or a mayor of College Park or city council, those are governed very differently, but they are not. Those elections are not conducted on the state election calendar.
Right.
So they might be very different, but for the election in November, everything is the same across the state in terms of times, process. We're very state centric. And so their differences between counties don't exist like they do in other states.
Yeah, good, thank you. And D.C. is D.C.
D.C. is D.C.
The city, as one former mayor said. I'm going to pose this to everybody because both Maryland and D.C. have mentioned voter centers, right? So pretty much anywhere in your jurisdiction you can go and cast a ballot. Virginia is not that. You need to go to an assigned place.
That is correct.
And so
that assigned precinct that's on that voter registration card that we sent you.
Okay.
That's where you got to go.
And so the question
on election day.
And so the question is, have polling stations been consolidated into larger ones? Should we be verifying where we go vote in person because it may have changed? The answer to that is yes. You should always verify where you're going to vote.
Right, but they have not changed.
But they have not changed, right? So yes, verify, but they have not changed. So the voter center model is really in Maryland and D.C. You still have a precinct model in Virginia, so you need to go to your precinct to cast a vote on election day. If you're voting early, you go to one of those early polling places that is listed on the website.
Correct.
All right. I think there were a couple. There's a good question about election security here, so I want to get that in. So give me a second while I find that. Here it is. With such an expanded, multifaceted voting system, what safeguards are being put in place to prohibit voter fraud? So it may be helpful for us to talk about some of the general protections, and then is there anything extra that's going on in that way? So I'm going to start in this case with Maryland about the general, and Virginia and D.C. can chime in about whatever additional things it might take. But what are some of the precautions that Maryland has taken for protections against voter fraud?
That's a great question, and that's a topic all of its own. But sort of the Cliff Notes version, I would say that election officials for years have been working on election security and protecting the franchise, but maybe it wasn't called election security like we do it now. But it is woven into everything that we do. So each of the systems that we use have been evaluated. We've assessed what the risks are, and then we mitigate those risks every day in what we do, whether it's watching for unusual behavior on our websites, to validating voter registration transactions in our database. It is just part of what we do every day. I think with mail-in voting, there's been a lot more discussion about it because it's new to people. It happens outside of the control of election officials. When I go vote in person, I am in an environment that is being controlled and supported by election officials. I have people there to help me to observe the process, where mail-in voting or absentee, because there's no difference, happens outside of the control. And so there are theories of what can happen. But certainly in Maryland, we track ballot packets. They're assigned to a specific individual. If the individual needs a replacement ballot, then that tracking number is voided and a new one is issued. And we follow that ballot through the process. Our voting equipment across the state is very picky. It's very picky. If I take a ballot and make a photocopy of it, it's not going to count. So the voting system helps us in that, right? We know that we can establish that they count ballots accurately. We do that after every election. We re-audit every single ballot image that's been created and compare those results against the ones that the voting system says. But it's picky. It can't take any kind of paper. And so there are lots of I would say, technical protections in place, lots of procedural protections in place that can give voters confidence that the system as a whole is secure and they can have confidence in the outcome of an election.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that.
Okay.
One, because I think many of those answers don't reach that far down the totem pole to where I would engage with them. But I would assume that many of the similar measures that Nikki has talked about are also in place for DC. One of the things I can say is that there's been a much stronger emphasis on cybersecurity, given the utilization of technology and other mail-in platforms. So electronic signature verification, package tracking, which Nikki also mentioned, are some of the measures that folks have taken in DC.
And in Virginia.
And I say ditto. Again, the tracking piece of those absentee ballots going out and checking them back in, being able to know that that's the one you sent to me and that's the one that I sent back, the electronic signature verification, those kinds of things are pretty common practice nowadays. And so ditto, we're very much aware.
So one of the things that more broadly that both Nikki, all three of you have touched on is this notion of security is not any one thing, but rather it's a layer of things. So the technology works in conjunction with the process, right? Works in conjunction with the identification and the and all sorts of tracking these information. So all that together, it really does make in many respects, it's the same kind of it's analogous to the kinds of layers of protection we have for the pandemic, right? Sure. So it isn't one thing. It's not just your mask. It's the social distancing and the mask. All of those things work together to build on each other. So we have about just a few more minutes left, but I really want to give you all a moment to make a pitch for volunteers. I'm sure you're doing staffing, trying to get people. And in a pandemic, one of the news articles talked about the challenge of most elections are staffed by older citizens. But this is the same population that is vulnerable to COVID-19. And so a lot of folks are opting to stay home. So there's a concern that certain jurisdictions will have a crisis. So are you all looking for volunteers? And if so, how might somebody engage and be a part of that process? And is there training, and when's the deadline for that kind of stuff? So you're the poll trainer here for DC.
Yeah, and I have to look it up. But as I'm looking it up, so the eligibility requirements for being a poll worker in DC are very similar to the voting eligibility requirements. You have to be, with one, I think, pretty key exception, and that is the age requirement. So let me correct something that I said earlier. I said the age requirement for the general election 2020 was 18. You have to be 18. You can register similar to other jurisdictions, right? You can register at 16 as long as you're 18 by the general election. So you can register if you're 17 as long as you will be 18 by November 3rd. But to be eligible to be an election worker, you only have to be 16 years of age. And again, it's you would follow up with this information at dcboe.org/election workers. But the requirements are that you have to complete a 4-hour training class. It's a one-day training class that's 4 hours. There is the option of, if you're going to work during the early voting period, you'd have to be able to work a minimum of 5 shifts, and those, I think, shifts are in 6-hour increments. There's a stipend of $100 per early voting shift, and then for Election Day on November 3rd, you have to work all day. There's no shifts, there's just one shift, but that Election Day stipend is $250. So presumably, right, if election workers wanted to work all 5 early voting shifts.
Real money.
Right, and also with an election worker, 16, 17 years old, there's an opportunity to make, close to $1,000. I will say this as well, there's been a tremendous effort in terms of recruiting additional election workers, and compared to previous, so certainly compared to the primary election for this year and then also midterm elections 2 years ago, the response has been overwhelming. I think that there has been a shortage of election workers in previous years. I don't anticipate that being the case. We've started a lot earlier than we typically do, and again, our response has been so far overwhelming. And similar to other jurisdictions, as you mentioned, right? Historically or typically, poll workers tend to be senior citizens, older, and we're getting a lot of younger folks, a lot of folks who are answering the call of their civic duty and wanting to help. So certainly we look for and are welcoming more residents from DC. But again, dcboe.org is where you would sign up if you're interested in volunteering.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Seville. Nikki.
So I am pleased to say that we are like DC. The voters have heard the call and have stepped up in great numbers. And so our local election officials are reporting that they have enough poll workers to staff all the voting centers. I would say if you're still interested, please call. They are trying to build their bench because I think we all do expect that as the election gets closer, that we will have some poll workers who will opt not to serve for very understandable reasons. But we have really been just overwhelmed. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's been a great thing to see people hearing the call and stepping up and be willing to support doing the basic foundation of democracy here. That's what being a poll worker is. If you can't be a poll worker or you don't want to do that in this election, consider it for 2022. And then for this election, make your plan, figure out how you're going to vote, make sure you understand the process. If you're going to vote by mail, make that request now. If you're going to vote in person, know where to vote, and then just follow instructions. We hate to not count ballots because there's an oath not signed or it's not timely. So please follow instructions. So turned your question from poll workers into just what voters can do because we have enough poll workers now. And I'm just really grateful for voters hearing the recall and stepping up.
That is really great. That's really good news to hear that you're staffed. So that's wonderful. So Nikki, do poll workers get paid?
They do get paid. It varies by county. So unfortunately, I cannot tell you every county.
Okay.
But they are paid for both early voting and election day. The amounts vary by county and by position. So that's really something that can be answered by your local election official in Maryland.
Great. Kitty?
Yes, like the other jurisdictions and cities and states, we too have had a wonderful engaging support of folks who are going to be election officials who tempered that decision with their own personal circumstance with regard to the COVID-19 coronavirus situation. Internally, operationally, we have sort of separated the team work so that if you are working one of those early voting stations, you can't really come work back office because we got to keep the train running. So somebody's got to be back there to do that. We no longer can share coffee.
All right.
Okay, so we don't have a universal pot anymore. Go to Starbucks, get your coffee, or bring your coffee, whatever you want to do. We no longer share meals where we would just put everything out. So personal responsibility has been critical, important. And in fact, there were articles in the DMV about the concern about not having enough election workers. What was it, a month and a half ago, something like that? We got so many people that called. We actually have been telling people we got enough right now.
That's wonderful.
If you want to work in upcoming elections or future elections, we'll keep the pool, if you will. Would be happy to do that. But this particular one is staffed to give us comfort about that decision. Like I said, we sort of had our two test areas with that delayed primary and that special election, both in June and July. So we got feedback from our officers that we've been able to tell potential workers, this is the feedback we've gotten. And if I can remember the statistic that our deputy director gave us, I think something like over 75% of those workers who worked felt that they are very comfortable.
That's wonderful.
And working in the upcoming elections, however many we have between now and the time we get COVID sort of taken care of.
Yeah.
We also have high school pages that are permitted to do that. The election officers are paid. I know a chief is paid differently from a different worker, which I don't have those in my head. I apologize. I don't know those. But again, you can contact our elections office and talk to the assigner, who is Eric Olson. He's our deputy. He handles the staffing, if you will, and he'll be able to go through all of that with you. And we do have non-paid volunteers as well. Some people don't want the extra money.
Right.
It throws them in a different tax bracket, and they also make that very clear. So, you know, we'll help. We'll help. You help us, we'll help you.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Saville, Nikki Charlson, and Kitty Clark Stevenson, we have been really blessed to have you to help us to understand the basics, but also the way in which we can exercise our civic duty, be people of faith and people of democracy. Let me thank all of you, as well as those of you who have participated with us with your questions and thoughts and your particular issues. This recording will be, this has been archived and will be available to folks so that we can you can go back and get other information. We are, as you've heard from our pastor, a church that is both concerned about where you're going after you die, but also what you're doing while you're still here. And one of those things is being able to be a part of the election process.
Absolutely.
So there'll be more information about ways that Mount Olive will be getting folks engaged in voting. But if you did not hear anything else tonight, you heard make a plan.
That's it.
Okay, so now is the time to make a plan. And if you're in Virginia, next Friday or Friday after next, the 18th of September, early voting starts. So that is, you know, for some of you, Election Day is less than a week and a half away.
That's right.
So make your plan and get ready to establish that plan and run that plan, whether you're in D.C., Maryland, or Virginia. Make sure you make yourself available so that you can exercise your constitutional right. Again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your time. You all are very busy right now, and we really appreciate you taking the time out to do this.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you from the Sanctuary of Mount Olive Baptist Church. Y'all stay tuned. Join us for Bible study on tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Come back to the same Bat channel and get into the Word.
Amen.
Take care.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.